so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Kristin Neff. Dr. Neff is a best-selling author, a professor of educational psychology, one of the most influential researchers in psychology worldwide, and most importantly, the self-compassion expert and pioneer. Her latest book, Fierce Self-Compassion: How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive, is something we most definitely want to chat about today. Welcome, Kristin. We are so excited to have you on ShrinkChicks.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
We love the topic of self-compassion. We talk about it all the time. We think it's so important. But to hear it from, the true expert and pioneer, can you explain to us what self-compassion is? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly simple. It's just compassion turned inward. And if you think of what compassion is, in the Latin, passion means to suffer, cum means with. It's basically, how are we with suffering? So normally with our friends, we're pretty kind, we're pretty supportive, we're there for our friends, we listen to them. With ourselves, we tend to beat ourselves up and treat ourselves like crap. Not everyone, but there's a big difference. So the easiest way to think of what self-compassion is just treating yourself with the same support, kindness, understanding, encouragement. When you failed, maybe you made a mistake, or just something challenging is happening in your life, as you would a good friend.
Why do you think it is that we have such an easier time giving compassion to others, but not to ourselves? Like, what do you think makes that challenging for people?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Some are evolutionary, some are cultural. So we have a lot to go up against. I'll just talk quickly about the evolutionary reasons. So evolutionarily, when we're threatened in some way, we're designed to respond with fight, flight, or freeze. I'm sure you talk about this all the time. So, we fight the problem, we run away from it, or we freeze and play dead. Now, the problem is if the problem is within ourselves, we made a mistake, or, we've done something wrong, or there's something difficult in our lives, we turn the fight, flight, or freeze response inward. So we fight ourselves, we criticize ourselves, thinking that somehow that'll get us into shape and change so that we'll be safe. Or we flee into a sense of shame. We kind of hang our head in shame, like metaphorically isolating ourselves from the group who may be angry at us. Or we freeze and we get stuck and we ruminate, right? When your friend, let's say your friend makes a big mistake, you aren't so personally threatened. You don't go into threat defense mode. Actually, sometimes with your spouse you do. So a little less compassionate. People are really close. Not with their friends. So with our friends, we're more able to go into what's called the care mode, which is also an evolved system. It evolved to, prompt parents with their children and group members to cooperate. And this is where we can use comfort and soothing and kindness and support to stay safe. But really, evolutionarily, we're designed, let's face it, we're designed to give care to others. We're designed to beat ourselves up. So don't beat yourself up if you beat yourself up. Like evolution planned it that way. So that's a big barrier to overcome. And then we can talk later, there's a lot of cultural things. None of us were really raised to be self-compassionate. We're taught it's selfish or we're suspicious of it. So there's a lot of barriers to overcome. But the good news is because care is natural for others, albeit, but it's still natural. It's not like rocket science. We know how to do it. We just have to give ourselves permission to be caring toward ourselves.
Now I've watched, I followed your work for a long time. I'm a big fan. And I've heard you speak before that you were going through a divorce yourself, and that's how you sort of stumbled upon this. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I didn't invent the idea of self-compassion by any means.
You didn't?
No. I was perhaps one of the first to research it, define it, etc. I actually learned about it when I first learned mindfulness meditation. So it was when I was finishing up my PhD a long time ago. And yeah, I had just gotten through a divorce. I was under a lot of stress. First of all, I was feeling shame about the divorce and what happened. And I was feeling badly about myself and like a failure. And I was also really freaked out because I'd spent 6 years getting my PhD with no job prospects in sight. I'd be overqualified for any job perhaps I could get. So I was feeling a lot of stress. So I decided to learn mindfulness meditation because I heard it was good for stress. And luckily for me, thank goodness, it was taught in the tradition of a Zen teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh, beautiful teacher, recently passed, who always talked a lot about self-compassion. So the very first night I went, even before I learned meditation, the teacher was talking about being kind with yourself, supportive with yourself, gentle with yourself, like you would to a friend. It took me a while to get the meditation thing, but the very first night I was able to say, oh, okay, how would I talk to myself like a friend? Well, okay, Kristin, you're going through a really hard time. You feel badly, you're doing the best you can. I'm here for you. And immediately I noticed it made it easier to bear. Like, it didn't make things go away, but it felt like I had this support to help me through all the difficult feelings I was feeling. And then when I did finally get a job at University of Texas at Austin, I decided to research it and developed a scale to measure it and kind of took off from there.
Wow. I mean, I think a big, it really speaks to like the shift in, what happens when you start to give yourself, more compassion, taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself. So, I'm curious, in your work, do you find like if you're unable to give yourself self-compassion, like how does that affect someone? How will that play out in their relationships? What will happen?
Yeah, well, so people who are, unself-compassionate, in other words, you're very self-critical, and kind of the opposite of self-compassion is judging yourself, feeling isolated and ruminating. So that's really, those factors are directly tied to things like depression, anxiety, things like eating disorders, even in an extreme case, suicidal ideation. So if you're stuck in that place, you're just more vulnerable to mental health disorders. And the wonderful thing about self-compassion is that immediately it's like flipping a switch. So instead of being judgmental, you're being kind. Instead of feeling isolated, you feel connected to other people. You recognize, by the way, these are the three components I should probably talk about. There's kindness, being kind and supportive to yourself. There's a sense of common humanity. So even though the word self is there, there's really not a lot of self-focus, because it's just saying, hey, everyone is human. Everyone makes mistakes. It's not just me. It feels like it's just me, but of course it's not. We're all human beings doing the best we can. We're connected in this big experience called life. And then mindfulness, the ability to be aware of what's happening, is what stops the rumination and the being lost in thought. So it's like you flip the switch from being hard on yourself to being warm to yourself. And then really everything changes. Your body changes, your physiology changes, your mental state changes. And it just improves. There's almost over 5,000 studies now showing the benefits of self-compassion. So
Wow.
Yeah, we know pretty well what happens. It really helps. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And we wanted to, because in our work, obviously we're seeing clients, and we notice how hard it is for people to be able to give themselves this. And we asked a lot of our listeners too. We said, what are some of the reasons why you struggle to give yourself self-compassion? People said, I don't feel worthy enough, perfectionism. I always seem to put other people ahead of myself. I'm programmed to feel guilty because I know better and I'm capable of doing better.
Yeah. So this is all very, very common. Most people are much more compassionate to others than themselves. So, again, we don't want to forget the evolutionary piece, because it's kind of that's our first go-to reaction when we feel or make a mistake is self-criticism, because it's a sympathetic nervous system. So it's not just because like you're a failure at self-compassion. There are reasons. But this thing about being worthy of self-compassion, when a baby is born, do we say, okay, once you go to graduate school or make a certain amount of money, then you deserve compassion? No, compassion is a human right? It actually is part of our humanity, this understanding that we're all kind of interconnected, we're all doing the best we can, that, we aren't in total control of what happens, and we're just kind of, moment by moment trying to do the best we can. And so that's one thing that sadly is our culture kind of treats us as if we have to earn the right to compassion. You don't have to earn the right to compassion. But of course, a lot of people weren't treated as if they were worthy of compassion, especially by early caregivers or maybe teachers. And so really, self-compassion can actually heal the blocks to self-compassion. Early trauma, for instance, or insecure attachment, which you probably talk about on this show, not having a good working model of trusting others. You can actually give yourself compassion for the pain of feeling that. It's like, imagine if a friend said, I feel so unworthy, I don't even feel worthy of compassion. You probably, oh, that's not true. I care about you, right? So you can actually relate to your own lack of self-compassion with compassion.
Wow.
You could aware of the pain of it with mindfulness, recognize you aren't alone, you're actually in the majority, and be kind to yourself because of that. And then you're giving yourself compassion. So it's really just a mental shift. I think another thing that trips people up is they think like they're creating the self-compassion, like I have to generate the compassion. Compassion naturally arises. In some traditions, it's actually this loving quality is part of awareness itself. As soon as we kind of, the clouds of thoughts and the emotions part for a moment, the sunshine already has this loving, peaceful quality to it. So you don't have to create it. It's just, you kind of have to get out of the way of it because it's already there. Whether you want to think of that as part of awareness or even just part of your evolution, it's also part of your body. It's not really hard. If you're trying really hard, it's probably not self-compassion. It's striving, trying to fix yourself, trying to improve yourself. Compassion is like a softening. It's like a letting go of these ideals of perfection and these ideas of, I should be able to control everything. And your heart naturally opens, and then compassion's there.
I would like to talk on this thing of, right, somebody wrote in this thing that we hear often is because I know that I know better and I'm capable of doing better. I hear this a lot of that. Well, if I start being so compassionate towards myself, I'm not going to have any drive, or it's going to, it means that it's okay what I did. And I think there's people that get stuck in that, like that we have to shame ourselves or be hard on ourselves for motivation.
Yeah, it's actually, the research shows it's the #1 block to self-compassion. This gets way more than any other belief barrier. Look at the research. It isn't true. What can I say? So, but we don't even need to look at the research. I'll talk about the research, but if you just use a more similar analogy, think about motivating a child, right? If a child gets a failing math grade, you could shame that child. You can say, you better improve your math grades or else you'll never get free time again or whatever. It will kind of work, just like self-criticism kind of works, but it has a lot of knock-on effects. You're going to create anxiety in that child. You're going to undermine that child's self-confidence, right? They may just give up. They may develop fear of failure. You're actually making it harder for that child to succeed, because when you're full of shame and self-doubt and self-criticism, it's hard to learn. Your brain's just overloaded with, I'm so bad, I can't do this, worried. So a much more effective way to motivate that child to do better is, first of all, say, hey, you got a failing grade. Oh, I'm sorry, that hurts. It doesn't mean you're any less worthy as a person. I love you just as you are. But you don't stop there. If you care about the child, you say, hey, I really want you to get your math grades up because I know you want to go to college. How can I help? What can we learn? What went wrong with your study routine? Maybe we can get a tutor, or maybe we can try something different. And so when we do that, what happens is we have more self-confidence, and really important, we're able to learn from our mistakes. I mean, people say failure is the best teacher, and we don't believe it, but it's true, right? So just to show some of the data, you can kind of understand this intuitively. But we taught self-compassion to NCAA athletes, right? And these people, they can't be second best. Their scholarships are riding on it. A lot of them want to go into pro sports. We have basketball players and football players and all sorts of sports. They can't be second best. So we taught them self-compassion, to be self-compassionate about failures in their training routine, or if they lost a game or didn't perform as well as they want. But the compassion was combined, and this is part of compassion, with encouragement. First of all, I believe in you, I'm here for you, but learning. The most compassionate thing you can do to an athlete is give them constructive feedback, not like you suck, but constructive feedback about how to improve your game. And it did. Their performance improved, both their own perception of their performance and their coaches' judgments of their performance. So, it actually helps motivate you to succeed. But it also, it may ask you, you might ask the question, is this really worth it? Or not. You may change your goals, because with compassion, you want to do well at those things that are really important to you. Maybe if it's not so important to you, but it's just because to please your mom or someone else, you may decide actually this goal isn't worth it. So it leads to greater authenticity in goals. And then once our goals are more meaningful and authentic for us, we're also more likely to succeed at them.
Wow. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you can have self-compassion and also have constructive criticism and,
Absolutely.
find different ways of doing things. Cause it sounds like, and we get this question all the time. A lot of people feel like it's either one or the other, right?
Yeah.
I can only criticize myself in order to get better. I can't have both.
Criticism is not a very effective motivator.
Right.
It kind of works in a kind of lousy way with lots of knock-on negative side effects, but it's not nearly as effective as constructive criticism, encouragement, and support.
It also makes me think about, because I know we're talking about, okay, give yourself compassion as you would a friend.
Yeah.
What would you say to the people who are maybe very critical of others or people who are maybe very judgmental of others? Where's that come in?
Well, it's true. We aren't always compassionate to our friends, or sometimes we may just sugarcoat things with our friends. Oh, it's not a problem, sweetheart, because we want to avoid conflict. But you aren't really being compassionate. You aren't really helping your friend when you sugarcoat things, right? So, usually people have some experience of compassion somewhere in their life. There are a few people, maybe, sadly, who almost no experience of it, but most people, maybe their pet they care about, or maybe they had a teacher who cared about them, or a grandparent. Most of us do have some model, or even if you watch the show Ted Lasso, you can model yourself off of Ted Lasso. So we know what it looks like. We know what it sounds like. We know what it feels like. Most of us, it's not like we've never seen it before. You can't recognize it out of a lineup. Yeah, we know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like and what it feels like. And so you can just, even if you aren't necessarily naturally compassionate to your friends, and there may be reasons for that. You may have trauma history or who knows what. We can still create the ideal of compassion. And so there are actually 3 ways into self-compassion. Some people, you can give compassion to yourself directly. That's a little high bar, especially if you aren't used to it. You can imagine giving compassion to a friend and then turning it around and saying it to yourself. Or if that doesn't work for you, you can imagine, what would a really compassionate person say to you? Like, imagine if you had a conversation with the Dalai Lama. What would the Dalai Lama say to you? So usually we are able to kind of generate that image of what would a really compassionate person say to me. You can use that as a doorway in. So usually, it's funny, some people are the most compassionate to their pets, like the most uncomplicated, loving relationship, like with your dog. Just imagine what you'd say to your dog, or if your dog could talk, what your dog would say to you.
Yeah.
Usually weigh in if we just look for some models. And it's really important to have models, because sometimes we don't know. I don't know what to say. Well, actually, if you just look around a little bit, you probably will find some idea of what to say.
We had someone write in asking about, can you explain either difference or how it coincides of self-esteem and self-esteem and self-compassion?
Yeah. So when I first introduced self-compassion to the field, I had done a postdoc with a self-esteem researcher. So my first paper was titled "A Healthier Alternative to Self-Esteem." So so it's kind of it's something that I was really cared about and did research on. So self-esteem is a judgment or an evaluation of worth. It's like esteem, judgment. Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? I'm somewhere in between. Self-esteem tends to be conditional, right? So first of all, it's conditional on being special and above average. We can't be the same as others. We have to be above average to feel okay about ourselves. Sometimes it's linked to narcissism, like we have to defend our egos to have self-esteem. We can't let in any perceived criticism. But really, it's contingent. It's contingent on success, whether it's success in academics, if that's important, or sports, or business, or looks, or career, whatever is important to you. Self-esteem, we have to succeed in those domains that are important to us. So you might say it's a fair weather friend. It's there for us in the good times, but it deserts us in the bad times. So self-compassion, on the other hand, is also gives you a sense of worth, but it's not contingent. It's not a judgment or an evaluation. It comes simply from being a flawed human being. It's intrinsic to our very humanity, which means it's a stable friend. You don't have to be better than anyone. You just have to be messed up like they are. I can do that. You, you can, it's there for you when you succeed, but also when you fail. So the research shows that the self-worth linked to self-compassion is much more stable over time for that reason.
That it's such a beautiful
Yeah.
differentiation between the two. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm like, why don't we talk about self-compassion more? I mean, we talk about it a lot, but like socially,
human beings,
human beings, why aren't we talking about it more? Why aren't we?
It's changing. Like over the past 20 years, when I first started knowing, did a Google search, wouldn't find anything. And now it's kind of people are starting to make fun of self-compassion now, which is good because, you've made it when people make fun of you, right?
It's infamous.
So it's starting, but yeah, it's fairly new, about 20 years out there in the general mindset of the culture. But because it works, I mean, this is the thing, the data is really unequivocal at this point. It works. You can try it out for yourself. It works. Yeah, you may be misusing it. Sometimes you think you're giving it yourself self-compassion. You're really just being self-indulgent. Now, self-indulgent is opposite to self-compassion by definition, because indulgence means giving yourself short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term harm. And if you're harming yourself, you aren't being self-compassionate. So you may think you're being self-compassionate, but if you're harming yourself, you aren't.
Okay, I love that distinction too, because so many people asked questions about that.
Yeah.
Right. How to balance self-compassion with enabling bad habits in self, someone said.
Yeah. So if it's a bad habit, if it's harming you, then it's not self-compassionate.
Right.
How do you change that bad habit? That's the big thing. What happens when, I've been self-indulgent, or I've been lazy, or, I've been kind of this, snapping at my kids, and you don't just say, oh, that's okay, everyone snaps at their kids. No, you're harming your relationships. But instead of saying, therefore, I'm a terrible person, whack, 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 as if that's going to help, you say, okay, yeah, I made a mistake. This isn't good. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means that this behavior is not healthy. How do I change it? And again, the research on this is very strong. It promotes taking personal responsibility for harms done or mistakes we've made. It leads to healthier behaviors, even hard ones like safe sex, or exercising, or eating well. So if you care about yourself, and it's really what it comes down to, caring about yourself and your health and your well-being, giving yourself kind of a more wise perspective. Compassion is also a type of wisdom. Compassion, like especially from like a more Eastern perspective, compassion is, understanding all the causes and conditions that lead us to act as we do. And that's why we have understanding for it, because it's so complex. The idea that we are like these separate individuals with total control over our decisions in our life, it's not true. That's not the way human beings work. So when we have the wisdom that can take the bigger picture and see all the causes and conditions, well, that also gives you the wisdom to see, oh, I see. It's because, I do this, or I'm hanging out with these people, I'm on this situation. That's probably contributing to this behavior. Maybe I could make some shifts, There's a lot here.
Yes. That's fascinating.
There's so much here. And so, I'm thinking about, because it sounds like as we're talking about this, it's very much a practice, right? You don't do this one time. This is something that
it feels spiritual.
It does feel spiritual in a lot of ways.
It is spiritual. And from my point of view, it is. You don't have to be spiritual to practice it, but to me, it's incredibly spiritual.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of, like I say, if you kind of take the view that underlying reality, you could call it consciousness, you could call it awareness, you could use the G word, God, if you want to, whatever, it really doesn't matter what you use it. But if you think of that as kind of the ground of being, then what's happening is we're just opening to our true nature. From my point of view, our true nature is compassionate, is loving, is peaceful, is wise. But we get in the way by, our conditioning and, our fears and all those things that come up. Yeah. And so when a real moment of compassion, so the three components, which is kindness, mindfulness, the common humanity, you could call that loving, connected presence. So when you're in a state of self-compassion, you're in a state of loving, connected presence. And in a lot of people's books, they would call that a spiritual experience, So
so my 4-year-old goes to a Quaker school. We go to Friends school. And this summer is her first time at summer camp. It's a very big deal. We have it, and it's not at her school. And so it's kind of scary for me, all these other kids and who's different values, whatever. And so the first day is, well, what do we do tomorrow if there's an issue with another kid? Or right. I was like, what do you do? And she goes, we just go to the peace table.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know if there's going to be a peace table at day camp the way there is at school. But I mean, a 4-year-old gets it so well.
Yeah.
So well.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
it didn't take much to teach her, right? It took like giving her access to stuff and having communication and having it modeled for her. But you have to wonder, right? Like, is that really such a part of us? If children can take it up so easily, that probably gives us some information about our capabilities.
Yeah, exactly. So empathy, for instance, is universal and kicks in around 3 years old, 2 or 3 years old. Helping behavior, for instance, these are natural behaviors. You can look at it from a purely evolutionary standpoint if you want to. You can be totally scientific. You can be more spiritual. I think in a way, it doesn't matter. From my point of view, it's whatever works for you. But what is true is that when you get in a state of loving, connected presence toward your pain, your mistakes, your failures, you are more able, first of all, you're more able to cope with suffering, so you aren't so overwhelmed by it, which often leads to the nasty behaviors towards others when we're overwhelmed by our own shame or guilt or inability to cope with things. So it increases compassion for self and then also for others. So it's to me, it's like a no-brainer. We should be teaching this in schools everywhere.
Well, but it is interesting. I'm wondering for you, what's like, okay, so you research self-compassion, you have lived self-compassion, you have taught self-compassion, right? So like let's talk about embodiment of self-compassion. And then we're currently living a day and age where if we even go towards social media technology, we don't have a lot of human beings that are always so self-compassionate, or very compassionate towards each other. What's it like as someone who's sitting here like, no, we're missing it. It's working. Does it
This is the answer.
Do you ever feel a little bit like you're losing your mind? You're like, no, people, we can do it.
Well, I mean, I suppose from my point of view, because I've seen such exponential growth and interest in self-compassion, I'm pretty happy with the growth that has been there. There's a lot of knowledge we have, wisdom we have in the world that isn't being implemented. And so, it is frustrating, but I do have some faith because from my point of view, I don't see humans as intrinsically bad and somehow they need some outside force to come in and save them. I see human beings as intrinsically good, and there's stuff that gets in the way. It's like the sunshine, clouds passing over the sun, but the sun is still shining. So, I hope, I have faith that with time, and again, if it works, and here's the thing, starting to look at this in business context, reduces turnover, increases work productivity, job satisfaction. Once we start seeing those types of benefits, then I think it'll start becoming more widespread. But you can only do one person at a time, or maybe one group at a time.
Yes. And then it spreads, right?
Yeah.
So
it is spreading.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing. For me, it's just, if I were to die tomorrow, honestly, I'd feel like, okay, I'm happy,
You did good. Well, but it's so true for the business part, right? Like my husband had switched jobs this year and he came from, his job before was like, get in here. We don't care. Stay until you need it. We don't care that you have a family outside of here. And now he's at this job that's like all about like the company, like the culture of the company, and like, please go take care of your family. And, and the difference. And my husband's like, I will work myself to the bone for this other company now because they are so nice and understanding. Like he is now so loyal and feels strong and believes and empowered and like has all this motivation. The other place he was like, this sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Intrinsic motivation really works a lot better. As opposed to control.
Right.
The self-critic is trying to control us. Self-compassion is like intrinsic motivation. I want to because I care. It's the research is without a doubt it's more effective.
Oh yeah. So for anyone listening to this who's like, oh God, like I really have to start practicing self-compassion. I recognize how hard I am on myself. On a day-to-day basis, like what would you recommend that someone is doing to be kind of aware of their thoughts and to practice that self-compassion? Like what would you recommend that they do?
Yeah, so it's actually can be one very simple way is through physical touch. Again, because we have an evolved capacity for care. So, putting your hands on your heart or your face or some touch actually changes your physiology. It deactivates sympathetic response, activates parasympathetic response, increases heart rate variability, calms you down, it feels good. So, and because as babies, we know that we know a compassionate touch. It's part of our evolved system. That's a very easy way to do it. Asking yourself, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Or what would a good friend say to me if that's easier for you? Bringing in the 3 components of self-compassion, mindfulness, this is really hard. Common humanity, I'm not alone. This is part of life. This is nothing wrong with me for experiencing this. And kindness, again, some words of kindness. I do want to bring one thing up though, especially since you're both psychologists, is the concept of backdraft. It's really important to be aware of. So backdraft is my colleague who co-developed the training program with me, Chris Germer, is a psychologist, and he came up with the term. So it's actually a firefighting term. So when a house is on fire, you don't fling open the windows because the air rushes in, ignites the flames. Okay. Same thing can happen with self-compassion practice, especially with people maybe with an early trauma history or, a lot of pain that your whole life you had to like close the doors of your heart to stay safe. Mm-hmm. And then you start opening up the doors of your heart, the fresh air of the love and kindness rushes in, the pain rushes out, and it can feel explosive sometimes. Sometimes people do explode at their therapist or other people or at themselves. Just it's really important to know that this is part of the healing process. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing it right. Because what it does is you're opening the doors of your heart. You're allowing this pain to come up so that it can be healed. But it does mean that you need to back off a little bit. Firefighters, one of the reasons they carry those picks is they poke holes in the building to let the air in more slowly. So sometimes the self-compassion practice, we just need to go a little more slowly. Maybe you don't want to, maybe putting your hands on a heart is too much. So maybe pet your cat or something, or just feel your feet on the ground or something else. So it doesn't even matter so much how you practice self-compassion. It's the shift in intention to support yourself. And if you're someone with a lot of backdraft or a trauma history, you don't want to just dive head first in because you may be re-traumatizing yourself. So having a cup of tea in response to backdraft is a beautiful act of self-compassion.
You're blowing my mind right now. And I'm thinking about, right, like how many interactions we've had where you're being you're being compassionate towards someone and they're like, just stop, stop, right? Like you watch someone's body contort themselves and they like put this like wall up and like physically often of being like just stop. I'm like so uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I cannot let this in.
Yeah, it's called fear of compassion. You can have fear of compassion from others, fear of giving compassion, and fear of receiving compassion. You should, I don't know if you know Paul Gilbert's work, but he's actually a really well-known therapist from the UK who developed compassion-focused therapy. And his work is specifically designed at people with trauma histories or people who have a really hard time, a strong fear of compassion. And they figured out ways to kind of work slowly and work with all of it. This really effective. What I do is in therapy. I'm not a therapist. I'm kind of skill building, resource building. But therapy has really important. Yeah.
But this is amazing because this is also the important stuff that you do outside the room, right? Like and that's what I think is so beneficial. So many times you have people that come into therapy and they start this process and they go and they show up for 15 minutes and that's fabulous. And then there's not a ton in between those sessions. Yeah. And this is real things you can do in between those sessions that are going to help everything.
Yeah, we actually have the mindful self-compassion workbook. I'm not shamelessly promoting it, but just as
do it shamelessly. Promote yourself.
Do it.
Well, because Chris Germer and I developed the mindful self-compassion program, which is an 8-week training program. You can take that online. Many people, it's too much, or it's, they don't want this kind of too much too quick. So we actually wrote up the program in workbook format, and a lot of therapists give their clients the workbook to fill out kind of in between sessions because there's a lot of simple things you can do. It's again, like I say, it's not rocket science. These are very simple practices you can do in the middle of your day that really make a difference.
I want to do one more question, listener question, and then we have to get to our calling BS segment. But
And also don't forget fierce self-compassion either. I want to talk about.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
we're
yes.
talking about fierce self-compassion. Yes. But so let me ask you this, and maybe this can go into fierce self-compassion.
Okay.
I think this is our good. Somebody wrote in and said, I would really love tips as a recovering perfectionist raised in a home with highly critical parents.
Yeah. So, perfectionism is basically being anti-human. So the research really shows strongly that self-compassion combats perfectionism, because what it does is perfectionism in a way is contingent self-esteem. I need to be perfect to be worthy. If I'm not perfect, I'm not worthy. And so again, what self-compassion does is, whether or not you achieve or perfect or fail, it has nothing to do with your self-worth, nothing at all. You are worthy, even if you're a total mess. We're all worthy as total messes. Our worth is intrinsic to being human beings. Our care, our kindness, support is intrinsic. Doesn't mean you won't try to do your best. Remember those the NCAA athletes. Yeah, they still wanted to be the top of their game, but their worth is a contingent on it. And so when you move your sense of self-worth from being perfect to being a human being, then you can, try your best, and you'll probably be more successful at whatever you're trying to be perfect at if you take the pressure off of needing to be perfect for your self-worth. So just think of like unhooking your self-worth from what you do, find the self-worth intrinsically. You're a human being. I love that term, compassionate mess. Like we say, the goal of practice is simply to be a compassionate mess, which is kind of not that you're trying to be a mess, but you're trying to be compassionate. Like that's your goal, to be compassionate. Even if you're still a mess, but you're a compassionate mess, you've succeeded.
Yeah.
And then if you're, I've achieved a lot in my life. I'm an achiever as well. Doesn't mean you won't achieve. It's just your achievement. It doesn't say anything about how you're worth as a person. And let me also talk quickly about fierce self-compassion, just because this is my more recent work. So there's two sides of compassion. One is tender acceptance. We accept ourselves as the mess we are. We accept our emotions. It's kind of soft, nurturing, comforting. But there's also fierce self-compassion, is taking action. So we need both acceptance and action. So we accept ourselves as we are. We accept, our emotions in the moment. But that doesn't, if we care about ourselves, then it means we also want to take action to make things better. Again, our worth isn't dependent on it. But because we care, we want to do things. So for instance, saying no, drawing boundaries, really key part of self-compassion. For women, very hard because we're socialized to be nice. But part of self-compassion, I call it mama bear self-compassion. Care about yourself. You're going to say no. You're going to draw boundaries, right? You're also going to meet your own needs. You're going to value your own needs. You can spend some of your precious time and energy and resources and money even on your own needs because you recognize that you're worthy of it. And then again, finally, motivating change, taking action to motivate change, to follow your dreams, reach your goals, do the needful, change in healthy behaviors. That is self-compassionate. But your worth doesn't come from success in those endeavors. You're doing it because you care, not in order for you to be worthy.
Now, when you did fierce self-compassion, how women could harness kindness to speak up, claim their power, and thrive. Yes. Why did you decide to do it for women? I mean, I could guess, but
so first I was just gonna, do it for everyone, but it was right. I wrote it right in the midst of the whole Me Too movement, and I just realized that. So it's kind of like yin and yang. We need both. Yin might be more tender, yang might be more fierce. But gender role socialization, and by the way, to be clear, I'm not talking about biological sex or gender identity, if you're trans or non-binary, socialization, the shoebox we put people in. So men are put in the shoebox, people raised as men anyway, as they can be fierce, they can be aggressive, they can, or they can be energetic, take charge. But if they're too tender, they get bullied and beat up and called names for that. And so it's harder for people raised as men to access their tender side. But women, yeah, they can be tender and soft and all that, well, especially towards others. And so even self-compassion. I mean, most of the people who show up at my workshops are women because culturally it's okay to care about self-compassion. But if they get angry or too fierce, she's bossy, she's too ambitious. Look at how we treated Hillary Clinton, You know, she was so ambitious. You would never say that about a man.
No.
So because I wanted to focus on fierce self-compassion, and because people raised as women have more barriers to it culturally, I decided there's a lot of feminism in the book, or not just in terms of understanding why it is, you know, the history of patriarchy and why it was actually very useful for the system to suppress women's fierce side, because then women would be compliant and go along and just like not speak up or make waves, you know. But it's not that people raised as men don't need it as well, don't need balance. But if anything, they need a book like Tender Self-Compassion, how men can harness kindness to like do better at work and reach their goals. And, you know,
Is that what you're writing next?
The next
now
one.
I'm not, because I don't have the lived experience, you know, but it needs to be written. So it's,
Yeah.
everyone needs balance, but that's the reason I wrote it for women, although I do, part of me feels bad about, because I know men need it as well. But hey, it was during the Me Too movement. I was pissed off.
Listen.
Right.
You
Yes.
know?
It was a good
You
time to
were
do
feeling
it.
fierce.
Like
You
mama
had to do
bear,
it for
you
you
know?
too.
Yeah.
So tell us, as you know, we do a segment on this show with all of our guests called what do we call it? Calling BS. So I know that there's so many, but could you call out some, can you do some myth busting of your field?
Yeah. So, I know how this is a myth we didn't talk about. There's a lot of them, that self-compassion makes you weak. That's partly because people really think of tender self-compassion. There's a reason, like 90% of the people are women who show up, you know, oh, that's kind of weak. That's kind of soft, squishy stuff. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So if you look at the research, doesn't matter what type of difficulty or challenge you're talking about, whether it's getting through like a hurricane or through COVID or dealing with AIDS or raising with special needs kids or going through a divorce or even combat. We have a lot of, actually, the VA is very interested in self-compassion. We have a lot of data on combat veterans who use self-compassion, and it makes you stronger. It actually allows you to cope with the difficulties, the emotional difficulties, trauma, you know, like moral injury, all this stuff. So with combat soldiers, people are less likely to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome if they had self-compassion. And get this, the amount of self-compassion they had was more predictive of whether or not they developed PTSD than the level of combat they saw.
Wow.
So think about that. Even more important than what happens to you is how you relate to what happens to you.
Whoa.
You know, maybe it's a little less serious, but you beat yourself up and you shame yourself. You're going to be worse off than if it's harder, but you give yourself compassion and support. And, you know, life's a battle. Who's going to make you stronger? If you're an ally, if you give yourself support, if you have your own back, or if you're an enemy, cutting yourself down, kneecapping yourself. Of course, self-compassion makes you stronger. So that's a big bust.
Wow.
Well, yeah, because I think about it in terms of trauma as well, right? Like, think about this is that people can have such different experiences of trauma and it can affect them so differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if the more you're self-compassionate, and by the way, it might mean fierce, might mean get off the couch. You aren't helping yourself. It can be like, you know, like a constructive, but mama bear sometimes can, you know, have a little attitude.
Yeah.
You know, what do I need? Do I need that more fierce voice, or I need that more tender voice? But the voice of compassion will make you stronger and healthier and more able to cope. And it'll just radically change your life. But you don't really know that until you try it. So all of your listeners, I encourage you to try it for yourself.
So you're gonna listen to this episode, you're gonna go online and you're gonna buy Fierce Self-Compassion. And then
but my first book is Self-Compassion, which in some ways maybe an easier intro for people.
But also I have to tell you, your website's amazing. You have videos on your website, you have activities on your website. Like, your website is incredible. So to let everyone know all the places they can find you, because you have great resources.
If you Google self-compassion, you'll find me, because I got in early in the algorithms. But you can also take the self-compassion scale. You can measure your own self-compassion level. I have like thousands of research articles up there organized by category. But I mean, the biggest thing is practices, free practices. So you know, if you don't have any money, you can't even afford to buy my book, no problem. You can just try the practices and just see how it's working for you.
And we're going to put all that information in the show notes and also on all of our social media. So you've access, you're already all over our website on our resources page, because we're huge fans. We cannot thank you for being here enough. It was really amazing.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Shrink Tricks. We always ask you to rate, review, subscribe. I bet that you have a friend that maybe needs a little bit more self-compassion and sounds like you should send this episode over to them. You can follow us at Shrink Chicks on all the social medias, mainly on Instagram, and then also at the therapy group if you're interested in connecting with a therapist to do all of your self-compassion work alongside these amazing resources. You can check out thetherapygroup.com. Thank you all for being here today. We'll see you next week on Shrink Chicks. And then don't forget that to grow yourself, you got to know yourself. See you soon.